Good afternoon on this May 3rd, 2019. This is the second of now four video recordings that I am doing today. And I'm going to kind of do this, I'm going to continue to do this where I do my more theological recording on Facebook Live, which I just got done finishing recording. And then I'm going to do a series of them on YouTube that's kind of more mainstream appeal. At times I'll go theological. Sometimes I'm just plain being nerdy. Sometimes I'll get, you know, maybe deep. I don't know. But anyways, this one I'm going to talk about is, and if you look at the back of me, you look at the stuff that's behind me, it should kind of give you an idea as the type of stuff that I will talk about from time to time. So like right up here, you can see I've got a small book of Concord. I have Concordia commentary from the Gospel of Luke. Right here, I got an intercontinental title. Over here, I have a DVD of Batman the Animated Series, and then you also see a cross there. That should kind of give you an idea of the variety of stuff that I'll talk about. So I might talk about movies, comic books, pro wrestling, and also, of course, theological stuff. And so what I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to talk about pro wrestling. And I want to do this as a first one before I start doing other things about pro wrestling, where I talk about maybe wrestlers, I talk about who my favorite wrestlers, I don't know, whatever. Maybe I might talk about what's going on in Raw, SmackDown, AEW, which is coming out soon. All Elite Wrestling is what it's called. But before I get there, I want to talk about the simple question: why watch pro wrestling? And it's pretty much whenever you say that you are a pro wrestling fan, there's kind of a reaction, oh, that's that kid stuff. Or, that's fake, it's all scripted. And yeah, it is. This is kind of a peculiar thing in our culture. There's so many things in our culture that are perceived as being, quote, kid stuff. And nobody ever explains why it's kid stuff. What makes something kids oriented? What makes something childish? And I've honestly found that so many of the things that are, quote, children material or children engagement is determined by culture and society, not by anything logical or intellectual. Nothing that they say, well, see this, that, this here, they say, because it's fictional. But the thing is, a lot of things are fictional. And yet we enjoy them. I mean, so, okay, so here's the deal. I've been watching pro wrestling since I was a kid. And yes, I did watch it as a child, but it's one of the things that's peculiar about pro wrestling is that as you age, as you get older, the reason you watch it changes. What you enjoy about it changes. And I sometimes wonder and I contemplate, do you tell young kids that it's scripted right off the bat, or you let them discover? It's a little bit of the Santa Claus conundrum. But there's a little bit of a difference here, and I've explained to that a little bit here. When you're a child, there is something cool about when you don't know that it's scripted. It's, it's really, it's WWE with WWF, what it was called then, World Wrestling Federation, when I watched it. You had characters like the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Sergeant Slaughter, The Undertaker. You had all these great, colorful, larger-than-life characters. It was almost like superheroes on TV, real-life superheroes. And this was back at a time when I was growing up. I was reading things like, X-Men, Spider-Man, Superman, and all that stuff. So I was into superheroes then. I still am, but that's a topic for another day. Actually, for later in the day. But wrestling, though, you had these larger-than-life characters. And you had villains. You had your villains, you had your heroes. You had your heroes that you cheered for. You got excited when they wrestled. They did something cool. You always get jazzed up, like when Hulk Hogan would come in to I'm a real American and all that. As I got older and I got into junior high and high school, WWE began to change. And this is when the Attitude Era began to emerge. The Attitude Era simultaneously with WCW's NWO run, so the Bischoff era. And all of a sudden, pro wrestling was becoming more mature. It went much more into the vibe of the Gen X audience, where you had a lot of anti-heroes, which is really popular in the mid-90s. So this is when you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, you had The Rock, you had Mankind, of course, The Undertaker's still around. You had Hulk Hogan, who was the, say your prayers, take your vitamins, brother, the real American, all of a sudden turning on everybody and going into the white and black of the New World Order. And, that was that era. And it was what you watched in pro wrestling was so engaging. You turned in every single week and you watched every moment of it because there was so many. You didn't want to miss the stories as unfolding. It was like, I'll straight up say it was a male soap opera. The storylines that they were putting together. Well, then I got a little bit, as I was growing older, went into college. And I ended up rooming. My first roommate was also a pro wrestling fan. He was more of a WCW guy. I was a WWE guy. Although, like during the Monday Night Wars of WWE versus WCW, I would watch WCW. But usually I'd watch them during the commercials. If you ever want to watch anything about the Monday Night Wars, I think the WWE Network has a really great series on the Monday Night Wars. I encourage, if you want to learn about pro wrestling history, or at least a big period in pro wrestling, I'd go watch it. It's really interesting. But anyways, in this time when WCW and WWE had merged, or WWE had bought out WCW, it was about this time that you started to see new stars. You started to see the Ruthless Aggression era, where you had Brock Lesnar, you had Kurt Angle, you had early John Cena, you had Batista, and you had early Edge, and all those guys. And wrestling, the in-ring product was getting better. The athletes were getting better and better than they used to be. Especially when you brought in guys like Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle was a Olympic gold medalist, and Brock Lesnar was a WWE, when it was a World NCAA heavyweight champion in wrestling. And like I said, the matches started to get better. You got people like, I begrudge to say him given what happened, but Chris Benoit was an incredibly gifted in-ring competitor. And the matches between him and Kurt Angle were some of the greatest matches I have ever seen. And I know Kurt Angle, the path that Benoit ended up on was obviously very dark and extremely tragic and evil, horrible what he had done. But the reality of the fact was that he was an incredible performer. Well, then somewhere in my college years and into my seminary years, I just pretty much stopped watching wrestling because I didn't really watch much of it, because the focus of WWE was very much on John Cena. The rest of the talent, and John Cena was just not my guy. I respect Cena's effort, and he really does a good job of getting over certain people, but he was just not my cup of tea. And I'm going to probably one day talk about the idea of faces of the company that WWE is insistent on. I'm going to talk about why I think it's not a good idea. And I think the John Cena era exposed that, but I'll talk about that later. But anyways, I didn't really, focus. I wasn't really much into WWE at that time. I'd kind of come in here and there, seeing what's going on, but I didn't really pay attention. It wasn't really until the last few years I really started paying attention again. And even now, I'm pretty sporadic. I don't watch Raw every week. I don't watch SmackDown every week. A lot of times I just watch What Culture's Ups and Downs, or listen to their podcast. and just see, was it worth watching it? Should I watch it? Shouldn't I watch it? And I might watch certain segments. Like, I don't know if you've been paying attention. The Bray Wyatt, Firefly House are kind of entertaining right now. But so I go through all this, and this is kind of the progression. But the thing that happened at some point, I can't tell you exactly what it was. There was a point when I realized that WWE was scripted. That there are people that the guys that are heels, they're written to be heels. The guys who are heroes, or heel means villain, is the wrestling terminology for a villain, heel. And then there's faces; those are the good guys. The people who are faces, who are good guys, they're written to be good guys. And when you realize this, and who's the person who wins matches is predetermined. They've determined it, maybe maybe a whole year before. Maybe they determined that night. Whatever, they determine at some point who is going to win before they go into the match, and they determine when they're going to win, when the other person's going to lose. They a lot of times will script out the first few bits, the last few minutes of the match. The stuff in between, they're kind of coming up with it on the fly, from what I understand. Like, they're kind of whispering to each other, "Hey, you should do this" at times. But anyways, the thing is when you realize all of that, when you found out that it was scripted, and you realize the story that's going on, it made pro wrestling, I think, all the more interesting and engaging. I became more and more impressed with what these men and women, and I'm going to talk about women's wrestling probably another day, but these men and women can do. It is absolutely incredible. There's some of the moves that they do, you hold your breath, you pray no one gets injured. I think of, for example, I was at WWE Sioux City last week, just a week and a half ago. It was the day after Easter, and I heard somebody saying, the only reason Charlotte Flair is so good is because of her dad, and I'm like, do you watch Charlotte Flair? One of the moves that she does, I think she's probably the only. Not many women's wrestlers do it. She does I think it's called the Spanish Fly, where it's her and her opponent goes under the top turnbuckle, and they do this total flip. Every time I watch anybody do that move, I'm like, don't break your neck, don't break your neck, because there's very little room for failure on that move. And the fact that she performs it all the time, and the luchadors style wrestlers do it. Like, I know, like, Sin Cara used to do it a lot when he first came to the WWE. Now, he's a little guy. He has a lot more space to give coming off that top turnbuckle. Charlotte Flair, for a woman, is a fairly tall lady. And you look at it, she does not have a lot of room for failure on that move. And you look at the things that they do, and they got it so perfectly tuned. And there's so many different moves that they do like that it's amazing what they could do. The creativity with some of the moves they could do, the sheer athleticism. It's, pro wrestling is basically ballet or gymnastics or whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. It's incredible athleticism. But the thing is, it's also engaging about pro wrestling is that they're not only just doing cool moves. Some guys, that's all they know how to do. But there's some of them that they could do cool moves. They could do some really electrifying stuff, but they could tell a story through it. They tell a story through their body, through their facial reactions, all that. I mean, the match in recent memory that stands out for me is Daniel Bryan versus Kofi Kingston at WrestleMania 35. Daniel Bryan is a wrestler, is so gifted in the ring. He could do just about any move. I mean, you can't do a lot of power moves because he's not exactly a Brock Lesnar type. But he has a pretty impressive move set. But he's able to tell a story through it. I think Daniel Bryan was the absolute perfect guy for Kofi Kingston to get his title off of, because Kofi is Kofi was the major underdog, and Daniel Bryan sold it so well. He made you believe so many times that Kofi was going to lose, and I think especially towards the end of it, there's this um, where Daniel Bryan slaps him in I think it's with the label lock, the submission hold, the Daniel Bryan submission finisher. He slaps Kofi in it. And I watch it like, oh no, Kofi's going to lose. And I would have been totally. I mean, I love that Kofi won, but I honestly would have been. I would have been completely angry if Daniel Bryan had won because Daniel Bryan was a guy that earned to have a long term run. But I do like that Kofi did, and Daniel Bryan sold the story. And that is something that goes on in the ring. But then you add into it, WWE also has these promos. They have, they get on the microphone and they're trying to rile up the crowd. They want to get them excited. They want to get them cheering. They want to get them to boo. And this is again where I get impressed by wrestlers. Some of these pro wrestlers, I think of somebody like Alexa Bliss, who in her promos, she is always just the nastiest of people. And she is just so good at being a mean girl, so to speak. And yet, I've met Alexa Bliss at Blizzard World in Chicago, and she is, absolute one of the nicest people. She's an absolute sweetheart. Charlotte Flair, again, somebody who is very good at being a villain, very good at getting you to hate her, and she's again extremely nice. And if you ever follow, I follow her on, I follow many wrestlers on Twitter, and Charlotte Flair is one of those people. And you look at the posts that she likes, and she likes to retweet or comment on. You could tell that she is at her core. Charlotte Flair is a pretty decent gal, pretty decent, really good person, which makes her heel persona all the better. I'm impressed with somebody who is naturally nice and friendly and kind-hearted is able to convince you that they are the nastiest, meanest person. They could get you to hate them. And in my life, more and more, I like the heel. I like the bad guy because there's some of them are so good at it. Some of that right now, another one that's like that is the Miz. Although right now the Miz is being the good guy, and I think he's doing just as good at that as he did as a heel. It's these type of things that makes pro wrestling entertaining. The story that is being told, the athleticism, and some of these stories are told over, several years. And sometimes the payoff is really good, sometimes the payoff isn't. Sometimes things are so organic, they come out of nowhere. Kofi Kingston winning the title at WrestleMania 35. I don't think anybody thought that would be a reality until basically Elimination Chamber back in February. The way that developed was incredible. And that's the thing. When you go to pro wrestling events, you as the audience really are a part of the show. If the audience is dead, that's not good for WWE television. If the audience is booing somebody that they want to cheer, that WWE wants them to cheer, that's not good. I'm going to use the example of Roman Reigns. He's not booed so much these days, and there's good reason to that. But there was, and again, Roman Reigns is probably a subject for another time. But people are well aware that there's been periods where Roman Reigns is supposed to be the top baby face, the top hero of the company. He is just getting booed so incredibly loud that they're muting, they're silencing the crowd so that you don't hear it all. And really, that's not a good reaction, believe it or not, because I don't know if WWE completely realizes this, but a lot of times those type of boos come where they're not really booing Roman Reigns, they're really booing the booking. A lot of times they're booing booking, they're booing the way the company is doing things. And so that's not actually a good thing. So the crowd plays such an important role, which makes it engaging. And some crowds are not so good. And I was thinking about this. So last Monday, as I mentioned, I was at WWE Live in Sioux City. Well, the same night, the Monday Night Raw was in Des Moines. So, like 3.5 hours apart or whatever, or 4 hours apart. And is, the SmackDown roster in Sioux City, the Raw roster on television in Des Moines. And the Sioux City crowd, even though it was not a big crowd, they were good. They were really into it. They were getting loud when they needed to. They were having a blast with the wrestlers. Which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to a WWE house show, one that's not televised, go to them. They're so much fun because the wrestlers are loose. They have fun with the audience. I think so many of them are better on a house show than they are on television. On television, you could tell they're intense, that they're constrained by the time of the commercial times and all these things that they have all the programming. So, but anyways, the Sioux City crowd was great. It was electric for such a small crowd, and which were a large portion were kids. But Des Moines was so poor. There was, Seth Rollins opened the show. Seth Rollins, it says, "I was own Seth Rollins." Is coming out with the Universal title, and he's going to the ring, and he's trying to rile up, rev up the crowd. And what is the Des Moines crowd doing? Sitting there on their cell phone, typing and talking to people, Snapchatting, Facebook, whatever. But they're dead. And there's another point later in the night that people thought that this wrestler must be really failing, but Des Moines not doing anything. And I'm like, Des Moines, I'm sorry, Des Moines, you really failed as a crowd that night. And when I saw that after having attended Sioux City, I'm sitting there thinking, boy, Sioux City should have gotten Monday Night Raw. We may not have had as huge of a crowd, but at least they would have been heard and looked like that they actually were happy to be there compared to what Des Moines was like. Des Moines should have gotten the house show, maybe, or maybe the SmackDown wrestlers were doing better that night. It's possible, but the fact that they had cell phones out with Seth Rollins, they are the U.S. Universal Champion from Des Moines, who slayed the Beast, Brock Lesnar, were all on cell phones. It's a little depressing and disappointing. And we wonder why WWE does not come to Des Moines as often. Maybe it's because a lot of times Des Moines is not a great crowd. So this is all part of what makes pro wrestling interesting. And there are so many good matches. And, part of the scripting is, the fact that scripted is interesting. You're engaged to see how do things develop? How does this care? Who's going to be the next star? Who are they going to push? What is this going to happen? But it's also part of the reason why WWE can be frustrating. There are wrestlers that you feel like should be pushed, who are really talented, and you wish that they would get more of a push, more of a opportunity, and they don't. So it gets frustrating when that doesn't happen. You think of, and so, I think of somebody like Cesaro, who just recently began a singles career again after the Bar broke up, which I thought was a great tag team, him and Sheamus. And first they're on Monday Night Raw, and it doesn't even show up on my Hulu because Hulu is a partial showing. I'm like, come on, can't see him there. And then last week he was on Main Event on the pre-show. So Cesaro's being pretty much buried to the bottom almost instantly. And so a little frustrating that WWE is pulling that again on wrestlers. And Cesaro is one of the most talented in-ring performers there are. If you don't believe me, go watch his 2 out of 3 match against Sami Zayn, which is just absolutely awesome. So that's what I have. Why I watch pro wrestling is if you're a child, you watch. If you're an adult, you watch it. You can watch it. It's just that you watch for different reasons. And now, if you are an adult and you're watching pro wrestling and you think it's all real, if you don't know it's scripted, you probably should get to work on realizing that, because it'll be even more. I think it's more enjoyable knowing it's scripted than thinking it's real. In fact, if you think if it was real, the people that end up being champions would never be champions. I mean, you look at a lot of the moves that are done. I mean, like the curb stomp by Seth Rollins, not really that devastating because you could see the other wrestlers bracing himself. So I mean, I guarantee it. If it was Brock Lesnar versus Seth Rollins, an actual honest to goodness battle, Brock Lesnar would just brutalize Seth Rollins. So I think knowing it's scripted, it makes it more enjoyable and kind of covers why some things happen the way they do. So there you go. There's my spiel. Why do I watch pro wrestling? My next thing I'm going to go into, and I'm going to have a second live recording. Like I said, I'm doing a sequence of them on 3 different topics. So that way people don't have to listen through, if they're not a wrestling fan, they don't have to listen to wrestling stuff to listen to the other topics. So I'm doing 4 separate recordings on different topics. So I'll see you in a little bit if you want to stay around. I'm about to record. The next topic I've got is I'm going to talk about Free Comic Book Day and Star Wars Day. And I'm going to talk about comic books in general, and the big subject, which will be full of spoilers, is what did I think about Avengers Endgame? So see you in a bit.